get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Speakers Showcase featuring Distinguished Toastmaster Dawn Frail. I am Kate Wingrove, the Training and Development Director with Toastmasters International, and I am so excited and honored to be moderating today's live Q&A session. If you'd like to ask Dawn a question during the course of this session, please click the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Type your question in and hit send, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible during the course of our time together today. So one more time for those instructions, you can select Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Type your question in and hit send. You can start doing that whenever you are ready, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. It is my pleasure to introduce Dawn Frail. Dawn is a leadership development specialist and an author. During her 30 years as a Toastmaster, you can bet that Dawn has delivered a lot of presentations. And in addition to the presentations she has delivered, she's also been in the audience countless times when things have gone well and when they haven't gone quite as well. And it's from these experiences that Dawn has created her 8-Carat Communicator Formula. Dawn's education session, titled The 8-Carat Communicator, is available to watch on demand, and we are so honored that she is joining us live today. So please welcome Distinguished Toastmaster Dawn Frail.
Thanks, Kate. It's a thrill to be here.
We're so excited to have you. So we do have some questions to get us started off, so we'll go ahead and jump into those. So our first question, some people are really nervous when they speak and they have a little bit of a hard time hiding it. What suggestions do you have for them?
Yeah, I bet that 99.9% of the people who join Toastmasters, Kate, join for that exact reason, right? For nervousness. And I can tell you that, certainly 30 years in, I'm still pretty nervous when I speak. So what is it that, we can do to sort of hide that? Well, I guess the first thing is to really know that nobody knows what's going on inside of you except for you. So don't tell anybody, right? Don't admit it. Don't say that you're nervous. Don't start by saying, oh, I hope I do okay, or any of those sorts of things. Just, it's almost like a fake it till you make it kind of thing. But that doesn't necessarily help you feel any better, right? So one of the things I would say, as far as advice is concerned, like breathe, because we get out of breath because we forget to breathe, right? And so remembering to breathe and practicing. And so I find that when I'm, if I'm giving a prepared presentation, for example, in my Toastmasters Club or wherever at work, if I practice it over and over again, even if it's just a matter of reading it and rereading it, and then I will use notes often. And to me, some people will say, oh, you shouldn't use notes because, you don't really need them and it's a crutch. But if you learn to use notes where they're really not distracting, people don't really even notice that you're using them. And that can be really, really helpful, whether you're a new speaker or an experienced Toastmaster. It can be a great way to really help you stay on track, especially if you're somebody like me who, I still go blank. And when you go blank and that panic sets in, then what do you do, right? And so if you have your notes, it's easy to get back on track. And the final thing that I'll say as far as an answer to that question is something somebody told me a long, long time ago, because I was super, super, super nervous when I would speak. And so the person said to me, the speech that you give is never the speech that you intended to give, but it is always the speech that the audience was meant to hear. And to me, those were just incredible words of wisdom, and that has just borne out time and time again over the years. So keep those sorts of things in mind, and play a mental game with yourself if need be. But those are some suggestions around how to hide your nervousness, Kate.
Thank you. I love the breathing one. My mom always likes to tell me, take a deep cleansing breath, and it's that giving yourself the minute to really pause. All right, we have another question that has come in. How can you use body language effectively on Zoom?
Yes. So as much as this virtual platform has been really incredible and opening up lots of opportunities, you know, visiting Toastmasters clubs around the world, people from all over the place coming and visit you, it's interesting. How do you really be effective when you are trying to use technology and use gestures and body language? So I think, you know, what I recommend when I do evaluations, for example, is I suggest to people, the first decision you want to make is, are you going to be close up where I can see your face and your body language? Or are you going to be way back, like, you know, maybe standing where I can see a whole range of gestures? And once you make that decision, then it can be, then you can use some different strategies for being effective. And so especially if you're, you know, sort of sitting like you and I are sitting, you know, today, Kate, at this sort of length, know that what happens with your hands, that if you put your gestures where you normally and naturally would put your gestures, your hands become these great big giant clown hands, right? But if you don't actually see that, you don't necessarily know. And so to understand really what is your platform, and your platform is this little square. And so if you can still use your gestures, but you keep your hands back, you know, closer to your body so they don't become these great big giant balloon things, but you can still do that effectively. One piece of feedback that I did get from somebody was, and I do tend to do this, my gestures tend to be very, you know, balanced. I do the same thing with both hands, you know, sort of all the time. And somebody said to me once, you know, that it gets a little almost monotonous. So to add variety with gestures, you know, I started, you know, doing one, then the other, or sometimes even nothing. But and for those who had seen the session, you know, I really do believe your face is your secret weapon, right? Your smile, you know, your eyes, and you can do so much. Like if you watch Hollywood actors on TV, like really great ones, you can see that they do really incredible things with their eyes, and that can become so engaging. So when you think about body language and gestures, when you're on, you know, a platform like this, think about your smile, think about your eyes, and those sorts of things to help add energy to your presentation.
Fantastic. And it sounds like flipping that camera on and actually watching a video of yourself a couple of times might help you figure that out a little bit too. The balloon hands definitely was something that,
Yeah. I know, unless somebody doesn't mention it to you, then you don't really know how it turns out. But, you know, that's a great strategy too, is to record yourself and see, you know, what does it look like? Because you'll pick up on things that you want to change that people might not mention. Yeah.
Love it. All right, our next question. We have some members that are letting us know a lot of their speeches are technical presentations, or they have a lot of information, a lot of data included in them. So how would you recommend that they spice up those kinds of presentations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, a lot of us, especially, you know, if you have a technical or an analytical kind of, you know, job that you do, a lot of the presentations you'll give at work are those, you know, status updates or project presentations or technical data. And so how do you really spice up those presentations? I'm a real data, numbers, analytical kind of person. And so I think I was lucky that I got a lot of feedback early on around how boring my presentations were. They were just, you know, cram full of numbers and data, and people, you know, eyes would glaze over like almost instantly. And so I think a great way to really spice up presentations that have that kind of information is to let the data or let the numbers like tell a story. And if you saw Dan Clark's keynote, you know, and he was talking about the art of storytelling, and then, you know, you have access to his storytelling book also afterwards, you know, to really take a look at that kind of coaching or that kind of information and figure out how can you get your numbers to tell the story, or numbers even to paint pictures. And what I find easier sometimes than even, you know, giving a story around the data is painting pictures with the numbers themselves. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So, you know, what is easier to understand, you know, 100 yards or, you know, a football field? Now if you're a North American, then a football field, and I'm not sure how big a soccer field is, but, you know, if you talk about the length of a sports field, right, or the size of a baseball diamond, then that gives you an image in your mind of really truly how big that is, as opposed to giving the literal numbers in the dimensions, right? Or if you can't, like there's a reason that the saying is the glass is half full and not the glass is 50% full, because you can visualize half, right? Half is a picture, half is an image. And so when we can create those images in people's minds, I think it makes it very understandable quickly and concisely. And there's nothing wrong with getting excited about the numbers, right? And so if you use, especially if you get excited about numbers, like if you say, our sales are up, 8%, which, may not sound like a lot, but compared to where we were going to be, when we thought the whole world was going to stay shut down, like 8% is like amazing, and get really excited about the numbers and let it tell a story, because people, do glaze over as far as the data is concerned. But what they want to know is, what's the interpretation? Like, what does that mean, right? Does that 8% mean that, we're all going to have, a turkey at Thanksgiving? There's going to be, presents on, our kids' birthdays. We're going to be able to buy a brand new pair of shoes. Is that what that means? And being able to, give an interpretation of what does that data really mean, and especially to people at an individual level. And I think that's one way to really get people engaged around data and around numbers.
Fantastic. So figuring out what the impact is on our audience, what we really want them to take away from sharing those numbers with them. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question from Rachel, who says, thank you so much for your video on the 8-carat communicator. She wants to know, as a public speaker, have you completed the marketing funnel, and do you think it's beneficial to securing paid engagements?
So the marketing funnel. So my company and my job is as a speaker and trainer. And so marketing is, of course, a big part of, anything and everything that we do. As far as the, what I do in Toastmasters, so Rachel, I'm not sure if you're asking specifically around, marketing through Toastmasters. I wouldn't say necessarily, because of my audience and the type of speaking that I do, I don't get a lot of business through Toastmasters, but I do a ton of networking. And so for me, it's a real good opportunity to, practice the networking side of being, a successful business person, because then when I'm out doing, my regular networking or trying to establish business and establish relationships and those sorts of things, I really literally draw on everything that I do and everything that I've learned in Toastmasters to be able to do that. So if that, if you were sort of thinking something else, Rachel, in your question, let me know. But that's how I sort of marry the two together.
Fantastic. A new question is, what can we do to improve the quality of training our club officers, especially now that training is going to be in this online environment?
Oh man, I got a lot of opinions about how to do effective training online. So I think that, what we're learning, I think, is that our audience needs to stay engaged, because I'll bet, even as you're listening to me right now, unless this is your question and you're the one who specifically wants the answer to it, you're maybe, you're clicking on a couple different screens, you're petting your cat, you're talking to somebody else in the room, like you're so distracted, you've got a lot of things going on, right? There's no doubt that that's what's happening for people. And that's what we have to contend with in this Zoom environment. So what is it that you can do when you're training those club officers to make sure that they're super engaged? The idea around using all the different types of tools associated with, let's use Zoom as an example. So you've got polling, you've got the whiteboard, you've got the chat, right? You've got the hands up. There is an option in Zoom, if your club is using Zoom, where you can enable more, they're called reactions. So I could, I could have a little coffee cup, I could have a speed up, I could have a thumbs up, I could have a thumbs down, all those different kinds of things, and then let people play. Because if I'm going to be on my computer and I'm, moving around and I'm clicking around, well, if you now have me clicking on things to stay engaged with the presentation, because I'm going to click and play anyway. So know that and give me things while you're training me to click and play with. Breakout rooms, and one of the reasons that I love Zoom is it has this breakout room feature that is so super simple. The challenge with breakout rooms, though, is that once you get into a breakout room, you can no longer see the PowerPoint from the main room. You kind of lose the instructions. And so how do you really make sure people are engaged and working properly when they're in the room? A fabulous trick I learned from somebody was to use something like a Google document and I use Sheets. So it's like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's in Google, right? So it's a Google Sheet document, and you have one tab for each team, right? So you've got team 1, team 2, team 3, team 4, let's say if there's 4 teams. You give all of the instructions on the page, you give them the link to go to it. And so once everybody's in the breakout room, everybody accesses the Google document, and then the instructions are all there, right? They know exactly what they're supposed to do. They know, and you send broadcast messages, 5-minute warning, 2-minute warning, 1-minute warning. And then you pop into those rooms and you say, just here, do you have any questions? How you doing? I'm going to go check on everybody else, before I go, any questions. So they expect, and then you say, and I'll be back, right? You tell them you'll be back, and then they know, okay, well, we can't get too far off track because she's going to come back and check on us. So I think that by using, so first of all, knowing that those tools are available, but also getting good, practice using them, because I'm not sure, Kate, how you feel, but when you're in a meeting and somebody's like, oh, I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, where is that? Oh, it's not working. What do I do? That I think is my new pet peeve, right? So we're going to have to start, instead of counting ums and ahs, I think we're going to have to start counting, how many times is somebody fumbling around, with the technology. It is simple once you know how to do it. Of course, as with everything, when you know how to do it, it's simple, but by practicing and using it. And so I think, because the club officer training, it is, it is very engaging if we can keep our audience engaged. And what we don't want is people logging in, walking away, watching a TV show, coming back to log out, right? We really need to make sure that the club officer training does a good job of teaching our officers how to be successful. And I think that's absolutely possible to do it using a platform, like Zoom in a virtual environment. Yeah, great question. Thanks, Kate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dawn. We have another question. This is from JD Thomas, and JD wants to know, what's been the most surprising thing that you've learned in your time as a professional speaker?
Oh, JD Thomas from District 60, my home district. Awesome. Hi, JD. The most surprising thing, is that what it was, Kate? The most surprising thing I've learned as a professional speaker?
Yes, it was the most surprising thing.
The most surprising thing. A couple of things are coming to mind, but I think the way I'll answer that question is this way. So, when you realize that being a speaker is no longer about you, whether you're a speaker or a trainer or, a facilitator or a coach or any of those kinds of things, I think as soon as you realize it's no longer about you, your whole speaking style changes. This is what's happened. This is what happened to me. Because it really is then about making sure that the learner learns, right? The student has not learned. The teacher hasn't taught until the student has learned, right, is the way the saying goes. And so it's not about you teaching. It's not about you speaking. It's about the student learning, about the audience member, growing and developing. And I found that when I sort of had that change of a mindset, I slowed way down. It was much easier for me to reduce the amount of content that I wanted to include, right? Because I think for a lot of, speakers, we want to put everything in the kitchen sink in, right? Because you have to know everything that I know. And if I'm going to tell you something, you have to know all of the background details in order to have this, one little nugget of wisdom. And I think for me, when I realized that, a lot of that stuff that I was doing was for me and was not for the audience, it really made a huge difference, JD. And then I guess the other thing, for people who want to be a professional speaker, to me, this is not if you build it, they will come. The earlier question was around marketing. And that's a great question, because if you want to be a speaker, if you want to be, a trainer, a facilitator, if you want to hang out your shingle, 50, 60, 70% of your job, of your time is going to be doing that marketing and doing those building those relationships. And, 10, 20%, maybe 10 is going to be actually doing the speaking, doing your craft. And the rest of it is all around how do you really successfully find your way in front of audiences. So I guess those would be sort of the two things, Kate. You got to learn that it's about the audience and it's not about you. And it's really a marketing business. It's not a speaking business.
Good to know, Dawn. Thank you. So Tony Nelson would like to know, how did you prepare and practice your transitions for your 8-carat presentation?
Wow, District 60 is coming out in full force today. Thank you, guys. I love you for being here and supporting me. So Tony Nelson, who actually just last year at the convention got a presidential citation. So I'm honored that Tony's here with us and asking the question. So transitions. I think that transitions are one of the most important things in our speeches. And, I remember years ago, I read an article in the Toastmaster magazine that really talked about how you, as a speaker, literally are responsible for taking your audience member by the hand and walking them through every step in your presentation. Because when we write a speech, we are writing for the ear. We're not writing for the eye. Right? If you're reading a newspaper article or a magazine article, you can read it, you can go back, you see something you don't understand, you go back and you figure it out. When you're listening to a speaker, you can't sort of, jump up in the audience and say, okay, wait a second, can you go back and explain that again, right? It's up to you to, as the speaker, be able to take your audience literally step by step through your presentation. So I think about that as, holding my speaker's hand and putting the signposts along the way. I do think it comes naturally for me because I'm a very linear thinker. I'm sort of very analytical and a systematic kind of thinker anyway. And so for me to say, so we're going to talk about 3 things today, A, B, and C. Let's start with A. Okay, now that we've talked about A, how does that link to B? Okay, now B is all done. Let's culminate that in C. And to be able to do those things really purposefully, knowing that that's you holding your audience's hand. Because remember, it's about the audience. It's not about you showing how much you know or what a brilliant speaker you are. It's about getting your audience member to say, think, or do something different as a result of listening to you speak. And so if you want them to behave differently, if you want them to think differently, you can't risk them getting lost. Having them very particularly in place, especially when I'm crafting my presentation, this would be the other thing I'd offer up, Tony, is, if I have 3 things, A, B, and C, I may reorder them based on the way the transitions work. So if it just makes much more sense to go from A to C to B than it does from A to B to C, then the transitions will feel smoother because there is that natural progression. So there you go. That's my ideas around transitions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's see here. So we have a question from Rachel, and Rachel said, your education session seemed really, really polished. And Rachel wants to know, have you crafted these speeches for similar audiences, or do you write a different speech each time that you're presenting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the 8-carat communicator is actually a presentation that I do for women leaders, actually. So the original 8-carat communicator had, all stories and things associated with what are the struggles that women face when they're trying to lead, right, in any kind of an organization. So for the Toastmasters convention, obviously I needed to have a much broader sort of array of stories because it's not just women who are in the audience. So the framework is the same. So Rachel, the handout that you have available to you, hopefully you had a chance to download that, that's identical, no matter what the audience is. What's different is how I talk about things. So for example, in vocal variety, if I have an audience full of women, I'm going to be, talking about and highlighting the fact that women, when we get nervous, when we get excited, our pitch raises like I don't know how many octaves, and we need to be cautious of that. Well, in a mixed audience, I may or may not include, that kind of information. If you keep the framework the same and you have, you know, different stories and favorite stories. And I do have a couple of favorites. And so certainly in talking to a Toastmasters audience, one of my favorite things to do is to talk about what brought me to Toastmasters in the first place and how I struggled. Often, you know, you see people who've been in Toastmasters for a long, long time, and you think, you know, and Rachel's question was like, you look so polished. Well, Rachel, that's 30 years in the making. So I don't know how long you've been a Toastmaster, but stay in Toastmasters forever. And, you know, you'll become absolutely the best version of you. And that's the way to really sort of keep it simple enough that you remember the framework, but you have different stories depending on your audience.
Love it. Thank you. Another District 60 team member, Wendy Williamson, would love to know, how has your 8-Carat program impacted your professional training career?
Ooh, so yes, Wendy Williamson, the district director, the one who's going to sort of steer us through the rest of this sort of, you know, pandemic. I don't envy her at all in the job that all the district directors have to do this coming year. So how has the 8-Carat communicator steered me? So, you know, Wendy, what to me, what 8-Carat is really all about, it's about being good at the basics. And when we're really good at the basics, then we really have so much freedom to break the rules when we want to, right? Knowing that we have that good, solid core foundation. So as an example, you know, if you want to do something, you know, different with your voice or different, you know, with your body language, and even the question that was asked earlier around, you know, how do you use gestures and body language in Zoom? So, you know, I said, you know, essentially the basics, you got to choose. Are you going to be up close, you know, in front of the camera, or are you going to be back further? But that doesn't mean that you know, aren't, you know, sort of in there and doing something really cool, you know, just for a second. So when we have variety, when we have these, you know, when we take our audience on a roller coaster ride, the audience at the end is like, woohoo, this was like amazing. You know, they were screaming the whole entire way, having such a blast and having fun. Because you were able to take them on that journey, that vivid journey, then, you know, they stay with you and they're excited with you and for you because they're excited for themselves. And so for me, the 8-Carats is all about the basics. You know, what's your structure? What's your purpose? What are you doing with your gestures? Be vulnerable. Let your flaws out, right? That's, you know, the whole thing about rubies. And the inclusions is be real, because your audience wants you to be real. So those would be sort of some key things around how the 8-Carats has helped me as a professional speaker and trainer.
All right, we have time for one more question here, Dawn. Let's see what we've got on the list. So, Maxine Henry would like to know, at this level of professionalism in public speaking, do you still have a mentor or mentors?
Oh, plural, mentors. Yes, absolutely. I've had, and I have mentors, Maxine. Yay, Maxine from District 60. Mentors for a variety of things. So I have one person, for example, who's been a mentor of mine for like forever. And so he's got a lot of Toastmasters experience. He's got a lot of sales experience, you know, past international director, just huge experience in really knowing how to come across to an audience in a very, very professional way. So I'll use Ross Mackay as my mentor, you know, in that particular vein. I have another person who's at my Toastmasters Club in Toronto, my Applewood Achievers Toastmasters Club, brand new to Toastmasters. And I think that if we always have a balance or a mix of mentors who are, you know, the old seasoned, well, I don't, Ross might not like me calling him old, but the vintage, you know, Toastmasters who sort of know the Toastmasters way. But then on the other side, people who've not been assimilated yet and can give you really good, honest feedback. There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing better for a seasoned speaker or for a Toastmaster who's been around for a while than to get evaluated by somebody who's maybe just done their icebreaker. That's where you get the raw truth. Then somebody stands up and says, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to say, but I thought your speech was great. I didn't really get it. I didn't understand. I got a little confused, but oh, it was probably me. It was probably my fault. That's the best feedback we could ever get. If somebody's lost, it's not them, it's us, because it's our responsibility to make sure people don't get lost. So mentors all the time, and maybe you have one or two that stays around with you for a long time, and then you pick new ones. But having multiple mentors for many purposes, absolutely, always and forever, for sure. Thanks, Maxine.
Wonderful. Well, we are at the end of our time. Thank you so much, Dawn, for your time today. Thank you to everyone who attended this speaker's showcase. We had such a fun time with all of you. If you haven't already done so, make sure to watch Dawn Frail's education session, The 8-Carat Communicator. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your morning, day, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for everything you guys do at World Headquarters. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Dawn.